Welcome back to Dr. SuperCoach YouTube for Pigs Round 16 Captaincy Recommendations. Holy hell, my top three captain recommendations last week scored a 186, a 177 and a 159. If you're looking for a SuperCoach captain option, you are no doubt in the right place. Unfortunately for me, I didn't captain any of them. I always had Bont locked in as my favourite captain option of the week, but I wanted to take a punt on someone with a high upside VC, and I went with Zack Butters. He was on 80 at half time, then got the tag, still got to a 130. I felt obliged to take that 130. It's kind of hard to turn that down. I could have still captained Bont, but I'm not really ever going to turn that down, and that sometimes can be the risk of taking a VC punt, that if they get around that score, you might feel obliged to take it when you know that there's a monster coming, and that Bont 177 against Richmond wasn't all that surprising. That was kind of a little bit predictable. So it was a bit of a weird Sunday for me, cheering on Bont because I own him, but also being mad at taking a 130. Anyway, moving on. Our final week of the buys for the year, finally. And plenty of blue dots again means you should be able to VC nearly anyone you want. So let's find out who I'm recommending this week. First up is Ed Richards. Ed's got a 3-round average of 123, and now he gets a matchup with the Swans on Friday night. Sydney are a positive matchup for inside midfielders over the last 10 games, and they just allowed a Butters 130, which actually could have been a lot more if Jordan didn't go to him in the second half. And look, that's always a risk against Sydney. But prior to that, we've seen a Cozzy Pickett 148, a Clary 130, a Chera 142, and a Hewitt 119. And like I said, James Jordan is always a risk to run with someone, and size-wise, he probably actually does match up better with Richards than someone like Bond. But Jordan hasn't really been attending many CBAs lately, so unless Richard really gets off the chain like Butters did last week, I don't expect him to tag, or at least not in the first half anyway. And with the VC shout, I think you can kind of ignore the tag unless it's glaringly obvious, because if the tag doesn't come, you've got an informed premium running free against a positive matchup. Number 3 VC is Zack Butters. Zack on a Thursday night is always a mighty tempting VC, and he did rip that nice 130 last week. Like I said, he was actually on 80 at half time. He was absolutely dominating, best player in the game by far. Then James Jordan went to him and held him to a 50-point second half. So the man, Zack Butters, is in form. Now he gets a matchup with Carlton, who are actually showing as a positive matchup for inside midfielders. Look, normally we associate the Blues with being restrictive, but they've recently given up scores of 120 to Tom Powell, 138 to Heaney, 126 to Warner, 156 to Dawson, and 138 to Rankin. To be fair, there have been a lot of other poor scores sprinkled in there, but that shows that there are some ceiling to be had against Carlton, and Zack has one of the best ceilings in the game when not tagged. He's got a 143 and a 130 in his last 2 non-tag games, even though that 130 he was tagged in half of it, so could have even been bigger. This could be a week where he gets off the chain and lets loose. Now, the Blues could sit George Hewitt on him. They do also have Chincotto, who can do a tagging role, but not really for midfielders. So that's probably why I've got him a bit further down this list, is that maybe George Hewitt just sits on him. But look, if they don't do that, I wouldn't be surprised to see another 140 plus Butters performance here. Now, number 2, TDK. This week, I'm doing the captaincy research on the Monday. I'm recording it on the Wednesday, so I don't know what ruck setup Carlton will run. So this recommendation is based purely on Pitto being dropped and TDK solo rucking. If Pitto is named, just throw this recommendation in the bin, find yourself another VC. Don't go anywhere near TDK if Pitto's in the team. But let's pretend for a moment that all our prayers are answered and TDK is flying solo. He'll be coming up against the second easiest ruck matchup in the league. Either Visentini, Sweet, or both. It doesn't really matter. I've targeted these guys really hardly over the last 2 weeks in this video and had great success. The Gawn 126 and then that Grundy 159 last week against Port. And prior to that as well, there was a Jackson 163 and a Blitzarves 128. This is just a ruck line that cannot contain their opponent. And TDK should be the next one to take advantage of that if he's the main ruck. And look at it this way, he got a bit of a chop out last week, so he should be fresh. Number 1, VC option, Marcus Bontempelli. The best midfielder in the game flexed his muscles in a big way last week with that crushing 177. I'm still dirty, I took a 130 over that. Anyway, the Bont is back. The Tigers had no answers for him, and now a meeting with the Swans could also be fruitful. When talking about Ed Richards, I explained that Sydney are a positive matchup for inside midfielders, and I demonstrated some good scores against them. Bont's last 3 scores against the Swans are 109, 135 and 131, so really solid, but not blow your socks off amazing. I do like the fact that Jordan hasn't really been tagging much lately, and a Sydney CBA mix has been Heaney, Rowbottom, Warner and Sheldrick. You know, that's quite offensive without any real lockdown players. We know Rowbottom can get a lot of tackles, but he's not a tagger. And that's all that Bont needs. When he's allowed to play how he wants without a Windhager type tag hanging in his pocket, he can do incredible things. This recommendation isn't really based on past history or great DVP data. It's more just one of the best players in the league coming up against a midfield that probably won't tag him. So why not take a punt on a VC coming off a 177? Now let's go. I'm excited about this one. My pod recommendations were averaging 136 over the last 5 rounds. And then Luke Jackson blew that out of the water with that insane 186. Talk about having the best scorer of the round as your pod VC. If only I owned him. That takes the lads to a 6-round average of 144 for the pods. And it could get even bigger this week. And I'm super excited about this one. Darcy Cameron is my pod VC this week, or C. Owned by less than 10% of coaches, but he's also my number 1 choice overall. If you bought him in off his buy, or if you're purchasing him this week, I think he needs to be in your captaincy plans. In the last 2 rounds, he's managed a 113 against Gawn, which is actually no small feat, and then that huge 156 against Rowan Marshall last week. This man is in form. Did you know that Darcy Cameron is leading the league for intercept marks for ruckman? Yeah, and we know how well SuperCoach rewards intercept marks. But it's not only that, Cameron has increased his clearances and disposals per game as well this season, which are 2 more metrics that SuperCoach just loves. But the reason I'm excited about DCAM this week is the matchup against the West Coast Eagles, who have consistently been the easiest ruck matchup across the entire season. Whether it's Flynn, Williams or both, it just doesn't matter. We're talking a TDK 123, a Cherry 153, a Rob 161, a Marshall 179, a Meek 161, and that highest scorer of the year, that Gawn 198. Ruckman against West Coast is simply the easiest matchup to target in the game, and Darcy Cameron in hot form should cook them. If you own him, please don't look anywhere else this weekend. Now moving on to the captains, Matthew Ralphew. Matt was great last week with 34 disposals, 8 tackles, 12 clearances. Watching that game, his score of 106 honestly felt like unders. He was everywhere, and he was a pod against me in one of my matchups, so I was watching him closely, and he cooked me. A matchup with Melbourne, who are a positive matchup for inside midfielders, especially over the last 5 weeks. They've allowed a Jason Horne-Francis 136, a Sidebottom 122, and a Windhager 126. But at the same time, they've limited Butters, Dacos and Steele to very average scores. So what we're seeing is kind of the second tier midfielder go really well against them, but them limit the first tier. And that's because Simon Goodwin is using a lot of taggers. And he said after the Demons last game, he said, we've got 4 players who can play as taggers, depending on who the opposition's best mid is, and pretty much one of them will always tag. So those guys being Viney, Clary, Rivers and Langdon have all done jobs recently. And I'm recommending Rowell in this game because I expect Noah Anderson to be their tag target. Noah was easily the best player on the ground in the first half last week and nearly wheeled them over the line at the end. He was incredible. So if Melbourne don't tag Nando, I'll be quite shocked. And that should allow Rowell to roam free and do his thing. I don't see this being a huge ceiling score, but I think a safe 120 to 140 absolutely should be on the cards here. Luke Jackson My boy. Luke Jackson went mental last week. He was my number one option for the week, and he delivered with that season high 186. Now, as you know, I do this captaincy research and recording before team sheets come out. So I'm going to assume that Sean Darcy will be playing, and I'm still going to make this recommendation on that assumption that Sean Darcy's playing because they said it's just a 1 week rest. And yeah, that's right. I'm still recommending Luke Jackson as a captain, even if Sean Darcy's in the team. But I'm putting him here at this spot at number 4. The reason is because he still has been getting 50-50 ruck splits, even with Shrek in the team. And he's been getting some non-ruck CBAs when they play together as well. So I think this is, even if Shrek's in the team and Jackson's 50-50 with him, I think he still scores well. And coming up against Rowan Marshall, who only wins the hit out in 38% of his ruck contests and is playing hampered, this seems like an easy kill for any ruckman right now. We just saw him give up that 156 to Darcy Cameron last week, a huge score. And even before that, there was an English 115, a Gawn 110, a Wits 127 against Marshall, so there are some scores. Now, I want to make this clear. I have Luke Jackson here in this spot, assuming he is rucking with Sean Darcy. If Sean Darcy does not play, Luke Jackson leapfrogs the next few guys and becomes my number 1 captaincy option and probably slots into number 2 overall for the week behind Darcy Cameron. I think I'd still give Darcy Cameron the leg just, but I'd put Doggy here at number 2 if Shrek is out. And if Shrek is out, all Luke Jackson owners should be looking in his direction again this week. But even if Shrek plays, I think Jacko's still going to score well here. Number 3, Tristan Cherry. Cherry's had 2 down weeks in a row, but he's just played against 4 ruckmen in that time. He got double-teamed by Freo, and then Carlton saw how well that worked, and they double-teamed him as well. This week he gets a matchup with Lloyd Meek, who I expect to be rucking solo. If the Hawks get crazy and bring in Reeves and keep Meek and double-team him, then obviously just stay away from Cherry, but I think that's very unlikely. If this is a Cherry versus Meek, as I expect, it's good signs. Over the past 3 games, Meek has given up scores of 126 to Rob, 127 to English, and 110 to Cameron. And a few weeks prior to that, he let Max Gawn smash out a 142. So Meek is certainly not restricting his opponents. And any time Cherry gets matched up with a positive matchup, we have to perk our ears up. This game will be played in Launceston at UTAS Stadium, and here are some opponents to play against Meek at UTAS over the last 2 years. Rob had a 126 last week. Earlier in the year, Briggs had a 99, but he was coming back from that horrible, messed up injury, so maybe it wasn't his best. Cherry himself had a 123. Jackson had a 116. Briggs had a 124 last year, and Marshall had a 164 last year. So I think this VC or C option is going to be flying under the radar as people see the shiny matchups of, a Bont Friday night VC or a Nick Dacos versus the Eagles. I think people are going to kind of go that way and look at those shiny toys and maybe forget about Cherry, and he might punish them. But honestly, I think his last 2 games are outliers, and this could be back to his 140 plus run, and people might miss it. Number 2 captain option, I just alluded to him, Nicholas Dacos. Nick's always going to be a tag target, but last week he showed an incredible ability to work through a Marcus Windhager tag, which is normally really tough. He was in the 50s at halftime, and then he exploded for a 100-point second half to finish with a monster 157. Now, I'm not saying he's untaggable, as literally prior to the game prior he was tagged to a sub-ton, but it does show a growing maturity in his game, and all the tag talk I think is quite irrelevant this weekend, as he plays the Eagles, who have not been tagging at all. We do think of the Eagles as an easy matchup, and they are, but they have improved slightly lately, only being a slightly positive matchup rather than a really, really positive matchup. In fact, there hasn't been a 140 plus against the Eagles for months. The highest is a Jordan Dawson 138 in round 11 and a Harry Sheezel 137 in round 13. The good news here is that those 2 players, especially Sheezel, score in a similar way to Dacos with their ability to cover the ground, rack up possessions, hit the scoreboard. I'm not really sure how high to project Nick's score in this one, because we know how he has a 170 plus ceiling when he's allowed to run free, but we also haven't seen any monster scores against the Eagles lately. But honestly, maybe this is the week for it. And a VC or C shout on one of the best players in the game is always a good idea. But my number one captain option is Jordan Dawson. Jordan returns off his bye for his owners into an extremely positive Richmond matchup. The Tigers are the third easiest opponent for inside midfielders over the last 10 games, and we just saw the Bont rip off that monster 177 against them. If there's any player in the league that draws Marcus Bontempelli comparisons, it's Jordan Dawson. A big-bodied, tough midfielder with the ability to take overhead marks and hit the scoreboard. Yeah, that checks out. This matchup is tailor-made for Jordan. Look, we also saw that Zach Merritt 156 against Richmond at Dreamtime at the G. Plus, Dawson hasn't gone under 108 in his last 5 games, and in that time he's given us 2 130-plus scores. In the past, he has been someone that we prefer to VC rather than C, given his high variance scoring. But look, playing the second last game of the round, showing a bit more consistency in his last 5 games, and just given this matchup, I do think this is one of those times we can trust him with the captaincy to bring us home. So they're my favourite 10 captain options for the week. As always, here's a bunch of names that didn't quite make the cut. I think they're going to have good weeks. I think you could roll with any of them as a captain in your draft leagues. I think Bailey Dale, probably a little bit disappointing against Richmond last week. He didn't do what we thought he would do, but Sydney is a really a nice positive matchup for him. There is a risk that James Jordan actually tags him. That's probably the most likely target. So VC only. John Noble, I think Melbourne have been giving up huge points to the defenders, so John Noble is a pretty nice option in draft. The Melbourne midfield boys, whether that's Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, whoever you've got in draft, I think they could do well against the Suns. In the same vein, Jake Bowie off half-back has been, Gold Coast has been given up a bit. Then we know North are the easiest matchup for midfielders, so you could look at one of those Hawthorn guys. Maybe it's Jai Newcomb, I guess. Then Josh Dacos as well. I think those kind of wingers, half-backers have been doing well against West Coast, so Josh Dacos is an option. Riley O'Brien's been scoring really well lately, and I think he could continue that against the Nank. And then the last game of the round, I think there's actually plenty of good options here. Whether it's Jordan Clark or Luke Ryan against that St Kilda team that give up plenty of defenders. Whether it's Jack McRae, maybe Jack Steele, but probably more Jack McRae against a Freo midfield. And then also the defenders for St Kilda, so whether it's Wanganeen Miller or Jack Sinclair, I think they could all do well as well. So there's some draft options. For me, I'm definitely running with Jordan Dawson as my fullback captain. I'm really happy and safe with that. I've actually got a few options this week. I could do Dacos, or I could do Cherry, or I'm one of the people that is looking to trade in Darcy Cameron. So if I trade in Darcy Cameron, my VC is absolutely going there because I think he could be the highest scorer of the round. So that's where I'll probably sit. But yeah, I'm really happy falling back on Jordan Dawson this week. Thank you for watching. Good luck this weekend.